There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a review of Night, Sleep, Death, the Stars, the latest novel by Joyce Carol Oates. This is the first full-length novel that I've read by her, and I really enjoyed it. It was a 4-star read for me. At the end of my review, I'm going to talk about why I had to knock 1 star off, but other than that one point, I really enjoyed it. I pretty much loved everything else about it. So this is going to be a very positive review. The only other book I'd read by Joyce Carol Oates was Blackwater, which is a novella, a fictionalized version of the Chappaquiddick incident, and I loved it very much. That was a slim volume. This was a chunkster extraordinaire. I did it on ebook before I got the hardcover in the mail just today as a gift, because I really wanted the American cover, which I love. And the hardcover clocks in at about 780 pages. I read it fairly quickly, for me, over the course of just a little bit short of a month. Now, if you don't want any spoilers that aren't on the inside cover, you're probably not going to want to watch my review. I'm not going to spoil anything other than the central premise, which is just described in the synopsis as a gripping examination of contemporary America through the prism of a family tragedy, and that a powerful parent dies, and what his adult children and his widow do in the aftermath of his tragic death. So I'm going to tell you what the tragedy is, because I think everybody else and their dog and all the reviews talk about it, because it was rather timely that this novel, which came out just about a couple months ago maybe, was about police brutality. So the patriarch of the family, Whitey McLaren, former mayor of this small city in New York State, comes upon a police beating of a Indian man and tries to intervene, and then he himself is beaten so badly by the cops that he suffers a stroke and later dies in hospital. So that is the tragedy. The narration of those events and the immediate aftermath in the hospital, and as the family gradually becomes aware of the circumstances of their beloved father's death, is just incredibly gripping. It was such a page-turner, and I was riveted. And then, I would say the bulk of the novel after that is his wife, his widow, Jessalyn McLaren's process of grief. And if you know anything about Joyce Carol Oates, you know that that's a subject that she knows inside and out. And that was the heart of the novel, and reduced me almost to tears on several occasions on my exercise bike where I was reading it. Just beautiful. I have never really understood what it was like to lose a spouse as much as this book showed me, in just an incredibly raw, powerful way. Jessalyn, the widow, and there's not going to be any spoilers from here on in, but Jessalyn, the widow, just goes to the blackest, darkest places inside herself, and she will stay with me forever. The adult children, they had 5 children, and the 5 children couldn't be more different from one another, and I'm not going to get into any of their characters really, except at the end when I talk about one character. They also have their own processes of grief that make for riveting reading, and I felt that as the news spreads within the immediate family that their father actually died because of injuries sustained by a brutal attack by police officers, and he was a former mayor of the town, but Whitey McLaren was in his late 60s when he was murdered. The family, and again, it might be a bit of a spoiler, but I'm going to say it in the vaguest way possible. The family is so numbed out that they don't really, with the exception of one child, they don't really address their minds or their emotions to that. And it's kind of pushed off to the side. And I questioned as I was reading it whether that was a failing of the novel, and now that I've read the entire book, I think not. I think Joyce Carol Oates was making a powerful statement about white people in America, that they are so enmeshed in private white people's problems, and I don't mean to poo-poo grief, because it's beautifully portrayed here, but there is no space in the selfishness, that encompasses their middle-class lives for them to get their heads around the fact that their father was murdered by police. That's how I read that part of the novel. I did really question it as I was reading it, and that's where I've gotten to. Joyce Carol Oates, based on Blackwater and now this book, she just takes her characters to the depths of their own private darknesses in a way that is really, it's almost like jumping off a cliff with her, because you don't know where you're going to land, and it's so visceral. The adult children are so affected and freaked out by their mother starting to reinvent herself that it just sends a shockwave through the family and through each of their private lives and complicates their grief in such dramatic ways. And this sentence, spoken by one of the adult children, the children are all like in their 30s or whatever, right? Late 20s to late 30s. And one of them says, "If my mother changes into another person, the rest of us won't know who we are." And that process of grief upon dysfunction is explored in such a potent way in this novel. So, to wrap up, let me just say what I didn't like. And I couldn't get past it. I thought if the novel concluded in a really powerful way, which it did, I might be able to forgive this one flaw, but I couldn't. And it's very subjective. Other people, most people that I know, this is a 5-star read. But for this one, to my mind, failing, and I'm not going to talk about it in a spoilery way, it would have been a 5-star read for me too. One of the children, Laureen, is a high school principal, and she is so screwed up and manipulative and just a horrible, horrible person. I felt that her character was so overwrought and did such dastardly things that I stopped believing in her character. I felt it crossed a line into caricature, and that storyline stopped interesting me, and I stopped being emotionally invested in it. And then it resolves, and again, no spoilers here, but she reaches the height of villainy in all of her acting out instead of dealing with her grief, developing all kinds of very trendy neuroses and behaviors. And then something happens, and I'm taking great care not to spoil anything, but somebody in a position to give her advice gives her a one-sentence maxim that she turns on a dime, and that almost made me gag. It just didn't work for me at all. So I would really love to hear comments if any of you experienced that differently than I did. A case could be made that quite a few of the adult children were a little bit overwrought, and their grief-fueled melodramas were carried just a bit too far. But I think for me, really, it was only Laureen that just so over the top that I couldn't forgive that. So that's the 1 star off. Everything else I loved. This book made me angry, launched as it was in the middle of us all, especially us white people, coming alive to the fact that the police are the problem. This novel made that so personal and visceral that I loved being taken through one family's journey, admittedly, a white family, and admittedly, as I've just said, most of them just kind of put it aside. They couldn't deal with it. A lot of stuff about racism and homophobia, classism, all that stuff was portrayed vividly. And what made me love this book was the gorgeously obliterative portrayal of Jessalyn McLaren's descent into near madness at the death of her spouse, and then climbing out of that and making her life anew. If any of that sounds good, I recommend Night, Sleep, Death, the Stars most heartily to you. Thanks for watching.